Thanks. Well, okay. Thanks for all being here after cookie time. This is not one of the optimal spots, but hopefully you're all just antsy and excited to get going with all that sugar running through your body. I'm Bruce. I work at Sage Intact. I run their sales enablement organization. I've been there about 3.5 years. If you were in the panel a few hours ago, you know that I have a 30 to 40 year career in product marketing and sales enablement. It was because I enjoyed working with the field so much in all of the product marketing pieces that I jumped into sales enablement right when it started to become a thing, and I've now been the director or leader or head of sales enablement in 4 different companies. I've learned a lot, and when I got asked to present today, I thought, okay, that's really great. I'm in Mountain View, which is 30 miles south, so that's pretty easy to get to. Although really, if you know this area and the traffic now, nothing's really easy to get to. But I'm excited to be here because I want to share with you something that I discovered really just recently when I had conversations with management and I had somebody actually tell me, so if you're enablement, that means every single piece of sales training and sales enablement is done by you, right? And when I heard it actually asked out loud, it didn't sound as silly as it kind of thought it would be if I ever did hear it. Let's do a quick poll. How many of you have ever heard a sales manager or somebody say, well, shouldn't all enablement be done by insert name here? Okay, so I'm not the only one, right? And the thing that's dangerous about that is they really believe that sometimes. And yet there will be people in an organization who will be the first people to say that's a recipe for disaster. And I'm one of them, because I learned that you can have a fantastic republic of sales enablement in an organization that has checks and balances and levels of enablement. And I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so sort of explaining the thing I learned about this. And hopefully this will be somewhat amusing. One of the things I also care very much about when I do enable sales is to bring up a very, very concerted effort to make them better storytellers. And of course, what are the main pieces of storytelling, whether you're a salesperson or Mrs. Williams, my 3rd grade teacher who put us in the corner and read James and the Giant Peach? It is metaphor, simile, and of course, analogy. So this whole presentation is an analogy for something that I learned. So I hope it goes over well. And if it doesn't, well, I hope you like the cookies. So first of all, my title was about establishing your enablement republic. And if I can think back to my high school civics class, a republic is really defined as thus. It's a form of government in which the country is considered a public matter and is not the private concern or property of the rulers, for which the head of state is not a hereditary monarch but an elected official. Now, many scholars will say that the United States is more of a republic than a true democracy, because the definition, if you go back to high school civics, of a true democracy is all of the endpoints or citizens basically have a vote in every matter of state, and the majority will rule. And there are no elected officials. And there's really only a few of those left in the world, and the reason is because that is a petri dish for invasion, monarchy, or dictatorship. So anything that might have started that way doesn't usually end that way. So our framers decided to take more of a republic approach at this. So if I think about that, and I consider how a republic could be interpreted as a sales enablement organization, in other words, kind of doing a sales republic metaphor, if you will, it might read, well, something like this. A sales organization governed by a hierarchy of managers, aka heads of state, that were elected by higher heads of state, aka vice presidents, to orient, lead, train, and ultimately get paid on an organization's ability to successfully generate sales revenue, aka moolah, based on their ability to retain, optimize, master, and ultimately flawlessly execute skills learned in set orientation and training. There you go. Amen. So what does this all mean? It basically means that there's one big axiom I have learned in a republic company that does have heads of state, that can be somewhat democratic, but in some cases very non-democratic. And the thing that you learn, and the thing that this tells us, is that you should always, and I learned this the hard way, as you're setting up an enablement practice, start with the managers. Now, this guy may not want to hear it about sales enablement, but eventually, if he branched out, he probably would. But if you then take that axiom and you consider what are we really, well, scholars at the UCLA School of Law consider us more of a constitutional republic than just a true republic, meaning that there is a guiding document that actually lays out the course of the, continuing with the analogy, of the practice and charter of what you're doing. And that if you go against that, you could get in a lot of trouble or at least spawn some very serious dialogue with your heads of state. So I went ahead and put down what did I think in this republic of sales that has hierarchical leadership, that are sometimes elected by the citizens and sometimes appointed. What would a recipe for such a constitutional republic be? So I pulled out my grandma's little 5x7 card and took her template on this. And the first thing you ought to do when you get there, and I've learned this again the hard way, is to start with the managers, the heads of state, and interview them on what they define they need right now. And don't even use the word enablement. Just say, this is what I do. This is typically what we can help you with. What do you think we need? And you start with the highest head of state. That would be the senior vice president or whoever of sales. And if you have equal sales for direct or channel or for countries or whatever, talk with all of them. Doesn't have to be a long conversation. But I'm telling you, the benefit of doing something like that pays off enormously. Even if what he or she says is gibberish. You took the time in your first 2 weeks to talk to them and get their input, and they will remember that maybe more than what they tell you. So that in the future, when you want to go ahead and get an ally, or if you want to go ahead and get something representative from them in the future, they'll see you as a collaborator, as someone who honors the head of state role, and will not cause so much pain for you. But if they do dissent, we'll talk with you as a human. Next one, interview your head of state. Who do you report to? Doesn't matter if they're high up on the executive realm or if they're just a middle manager or a senior director, whatever level. Do that job, because they probably did write the job description, but many times they didn't. And they need to be able to chime in with their biases, with their interpretation of that. And you might think that's not a big deal, but you'd be surprised at how many people I check in with that have not really asked them what they expect when it comes to rolling out their enablement constitution. And the analogy continues. Next, make sure that you poll the citizens. This does not have to be an all-hands 2,200 question poll, but it should be something that they have to respond to that gives them a chance to think about their answer and come back to it. So a conversation to a lot of the sales entities and even some of the marketing leadership probably not net you the best information that you could use to combine with the other management information. So pull out something from our friends at SurveyMonkey or enter your survey name here. Put a 10-question survey down with a lot of open answers and correlate that information along with the manager input. And don't forget, there's someone else you have to interview too on this, and that is yourself. If you're first time starting out in sales enablement, then you have all these things you've always wanted to see in enablement people you worked inside a company with but never had. So now you have your chance to be able to do this. And if you're old like dirt, like me, then you can look back at an entire career and see what helped and what didn't help. And figure that in based on the feedback you got as well as what the company needs. And now you have a constitution to guide your enablement practice. That when someone says, well, we really need this, but we really need this, but we really need this in 6 months, you can have this guide you to help work with your head of state to figure out which one is the right choice. You with me so far? It's all common sense, right? You would think so. I've seen a lot of people go at this like, all right, I'm building the whole thing right now, and why aren't anybody doing it? Adoption levels are averaging 19%. I just can't figure out why. And then all the managers jump up and scream and yell, well, you didn't ask me. You're certifying on things they already know and don't care to go through. Or you're spending a lot of time on learning the way salespeople learn about something that is immaterial to our sales cycles. So once you get these things, move forward. And I know everybody wants an example, so here's what we set up for our constitutional republic of sales enablement. And once again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is just some of the highlights. We found that it's important to build a belief and a value system, and from that, you can have conversations that will net out your goals. Belief systems and value systems are amazing, but if there isn't an outlet for what those are all about that is actionable and executory, it's just kind of a waste of time. So number one, this should be in a reliable place that everybody in sales can go to for honest assistance and guidance without judgment. We're not in your chain of command. You want to come and tell me about how your career's in the toilet and la 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 la, and you don't know what to do this. It's like, okay, I got 10 or 8 minutes for that. But you can do that because I'm not in your chain of command. And you'd be surprised at how many people do, from senior VPs all the way down to an SDR who's been there for a month. Make sure they know that you're there to help in any way you can. Number two, they should have a single place to be able to go for resources that we've talked about all the rest of the sessions today, that number one, they can find, and number two, they can trust. And that is important from a sales standpoint, because if they go to a place they don't trust or they can't find something, then they may be looking at their systems engineer and saying, we got a long weekend because we got to create this thing, when they could be 1 or 2 mouse clicks away from exactly what they need and they just didn't know where to go. Again, is it tactical? Absolutely. Is it critical to the success of the Republic? Absolutely. All right? A number 3 value or belief that we have is new hires should be treated with respect, and they should be able to come into the company and be there just as excited as they were 2 weeks later, because you have a systemic, organized way to welcome them, train them, and guide them through their onboarding, through their initiation to the Republic in a thoughtful, understandable, and efficient and relevant way. And if you don't have any type of onboarding that meets their enthusiasm with an equal pound of, this is how you become successful here, whether it's on demand, whether it's face-to-face, whatever, could be in trouble, okay? And then another great value is, most people agree with this. If you agree with this, raise your hand, that video, either inbound or outbound, is one of the absolute best enablement mediums available today. Yes? Yes. Another one that I put in here at the last minute is, we agree that people love to buy, but they hate being told how or what to buy. So you need to involve them in the decision process as you're learning and being enabled, so that they have just as much, if not more, of a decision in this and are happily ready to sign on the line that is dotted. So with all these things, you have to also instill in their heads, especially the young ones, that, you know what, you don't have to grind this prospect into pimento loaf if they're just not buying. It's okay to cut your losses on a deal that just is not qualified. It saves them time, it saves you time, and later on, maybe they will come back to you when they've got a real opportunity because you handled it well. So, all those are great, but the biggest value that I've strived to bring to a company, because I've seen it firsthand, is if you are guilty of 150% dedication to the success of your prospects, of your existing customers, of your channel partners, of your technology alliances, and really are working to sell with them or to them with a purpose that is bigger than money, bigger than your own self-interest, you will outperform the competition and reap between 300% and 400% the personal return than you ever thought possible. And I have a couple of testimonials to this. This professional who I respect greatly has written a book about this after stumbling into this concept of selling with a noble purpose, and has dedicated her consulting career to it. Organizations with a selling purpose bigger than money or themselves can outperform the competition up to 350%. And that doesn't even get into whatever the return is, however you judge it, whether it's money, whether it's fame, whether it's promotion, advancement, the sky is yours. And this is a lady named Lisa Earl McLeod. Does anybody know Lisa? You should. She works out of Atlanta, and she was a consultant, and she was working for a pharmaceutical corporation, and spent a week going out on the road with the reps. I mean, I don't really want to tell you the name of this pharmaceutical, but their initials were Merck. And what she ended up doing was dropping off a rep at an airport before she caught a plane out of another airport, and some question hit her, and she doesn't know why. But she remembers asking it anyway, and she said, you're an amazing rep. What goes through your mind when you have these amazing conversations with your prospects and your customers? And she turned around and said, Lisa, it's very easy. I remember one situation at the VA in Baltimore. And I walked into the VA and I was wearing my badge and it said the company name. And this lady who was sitting over in a chair and I would have thought that she was a cripple, never walked, never did anything. She bounded out of the chair, ran over to me and threw her arms around me. Never met her before in her life. And she said, thank you so much. And the rep was like, do we know each other? She goes, it doesn't matter. Your company developed the drug that got me out of a wheelchair, that gets me up on my feet, that allows me to stay on my feet for hours at a day when I was in bed for hours a day, that gets me on an airplane, flies across the country, and I can play on the floor with my grandkids, and it's your fault. And she just lost it. So she's telling Lisa this story. She's famous for telling this. It's on her website. And she just loses it, telling whoever about the story. And from that moment on, that entire flight home to Atlanta, she thought, that's what being a professional salesperson should be. Even though this rep backed into it, that is what should be the biggest thing in the mindset of the sales team, is trust yourself to be the best for your customer and your channel partners and your alliances, and it will come back to you in spades. So that is one of our biggest values. And without exception, almost every single sales leader I've ever talked to agrees. Now we have another testimonial here. By the way, Lisa is an amazing speaker, and we had her at our sales kickoff last year, and she did a brilliant job. So highly recommend you look into her. She's just amazingly connecting to all of your citizens, if you will. The moment there is suspicion about a person's motives, everything they do becomes tainted. Now, I don't know if this person is ever going to make it to one of your kickoffs, but it's Gandhi, for goodness sake. So this is a huge discovery I made about 10 years ago. And if you get this whole enablement thing right, there should be something in there about dedication to selling with a noble purpose, okay? So, with all of those beliefs and everything that we're doing, how do I get to the goals of this enablement constitution? Well, these are the 4 goals that I've come up with for the current company that I'm in. Be able to provide your sales teams with guidance that enforces the sales processes and enables sales fluency. The processes, how you get through a deal, the processes of learning, of onboarding, of reboarding, so that You can have programs that support them at every single level of their tenure, and they should be based on some of the same technology and some of the same framework, that was a word that was used earlier today, so that they're familiar with it and it's not hard to do. If you offer programming that considers the enablement needs of all of the parts of your sales organization, you're on track. If there's one part that isn't in there, there'd better be a really good reason. And in our case, I do a lot more with direct than I do with channel because we have a channel director of sales enablement. If you accelerate the revenue contributing productivity of new sales, like I mentioned before, in a special way, in a super programmed way, in a way that will get them out and running quickly and easily, you have to also ensure that the other staff that has already gone through that is more mature, there's still something that maximizes and sustains their revenue contribution too. Again, if you use the same framework in a different way, that's a plus. And then the last thing, and I can't overemphasize this more because I'm so guilty of this, I am my own worst enemy in my learning curve as a professional, is that if you make something too complex and too over the top and don't make it understandable about why this will immediately help them be better at their job, you are going to fail. And the words here are provide a comprehensive curriculum that facilitates continuous learning, certifications, meaning that you show me in context what it is that we just taught you, and sales competency growth that is fully based on common sense. Once you tell them what they're doing, they could tell you back why we're doing it and understand it immediately. Common sense is the key to increasing adoption to any of the enablement tools that we have. And that is the fourth of our 4 goals. So do all these things while you're focusing on that, and then when you're under the gun and it's 3 months before kickoff and you're trying to figure out what to program or what to bring in, you've got your goal sheet that can break any ties and help guide you toward the thing that makes more sense for the Republic. There's another thing I love too, and that is the power of 3. How many people are in product marketing right now? Or marketing of some kind? Okay, and how many of you message in that job? All of you, of course. How many of you have learned the power of 3 is such an important thing? Yeah. Not 1, not 4, 3. It's just the way the human brain is wired. 3, especially for salespeople, just sets the plane, right? 2 is a line, 1 is a dot, for them to be able to understand and learn what you're doing without spending a whole lot of time on it, and the retention goes straight down into the toilet if you add more than 3. So I started thinking about, I like 3. I was in product marketing for a lot of years and I used 3, but how does 3 apply to this conversation? This is where we get to the federal, state, and local piece. And I know what you're thinking. Bruce, you're so awesome, but what the hell does your title have to do with anything in this presentation? I know you're thinking that. You don't have to applaud or anything. I will show you. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the famous 3s in the governance of our fair country and state. You've got the executive branch, you've got the legislative branch, and you've got the judicial branch, right? That's a pretty important power of 3 right there. But what if you take it down to the next level? You have your federal level of government, then you have your state level, in our case, where we are right now, California, and of course you have your local level. Well, it just aligned like the stars to me that when I heard the 14th person say, well, if you're enablement, you must do everything, and we don't have to do a darn thing. It seems to me that the best situation you can do and put together in your little enablement republic is to embrace these very borderline analogies and put together how you would be able to make this happen in your enablement organization and why. So let's go ahead and put up a little triangle here. A lot of money spent on this graphic. In the middle, the almighty $, right? 3 sides. What do you think the first one's going to say? Yes. We are the feds. How are you? I'm the only one wearing a blue blazer in this whole building today, too. I look more like a fed than anybody. We're responsible for that platform, that framework, that one-stop tool set that will give you something that you can send across a lot of the other goals and a lot of the other levels of enablement. This is where you also can work on the general high-level stuff that's meant for most all of your sales teams. You do just-in-time training when something like that has around. It could be something as easy as a quote-unquote lunch and learn, or it can be the greatest new 4-page competitive update on your number one competitor that just happens to go out when it's needed. We also do reboarding. So if the general population needs to hear something, but in their terms, we do it differently than someone who's under 3 months. It has to be in their context. Content management, holy cow, that talks right back to like the second axiom of what if we've got cool stuff but nobody can find it, you might as well not have any cool stuff at all. And that can be combined with a lot of different departments, by the way. That's where product marketing and enablement can really get together and make some music together. You should find a way to work with the sales managers on their QBRs, or they're just dying for your input. How do you rate them? Is there a way to automate them? Can you put them, oh my gosh, in your sales enablement platform so that they're viewable and saved moving forward? That would be amazing. And the other things are pretty straightforward, right? And all based on common sense. Learning initiatives, focused programming in general that applies to everybody, as well as centralized communications to the sales team. And it would make sense in some cases if you are in charge of SKO, or at least in charge of the content, to put that down in this bucket too. So there's the federal level of enablement, the highest level meant for all the citizens. But what do I mean about state? Well, this is where your sales managers come into play, right? The same sales manager who stood in the back of the room and said, so I thought you were doing all the enablement for everybody, was the first person who said, I want to be able to clarify and connect my new hire to the things I find personally important in my experience. I want to be able to bring my perspective, my experience to what they're doing. And I'm like, I'm with you. I want to be able to educate on specific tools the way I would use them and do pitches in a way that would work for me because I'm the one they're reporting to. I'm also overriding on them, but I want that control. And I'm like, keep going. I want to be able to have team meetings. I want to be able to have internal communications that only my people know. Sometimes only that one person knows. I want to be able to coach. I want to be able to enforce the expectations on me down to you. I have a very important job in the enablement of my people. So we call that the state level. You starting to get where I'm going on this? And then, of course, the last one is the local level. The local level would be defined in this somewhat borderline analogy that's starting to get a little old, as their peers, their colleagues, and even other departments that make an effort to do some of this stuff, but not necessarily as part of the enablement constitution. So this is experienced team members that when they go back to their office are sitting around them and have a shortcut to a Salesforce report that will help them figure something out immediately. They're the ones that can provide the hints and the tips and the tricks and how to manage that manager and relegate stuff upward and work with other departments like marketing to be able to find the things that may not necessarily be in certain holes in this constitution, to feel a safe haven from people who are just like you, that are just a little bit more experienced, to give you that kind of information. And I cannot underscore enough the value of this right now. And I'm sure if you think about it and talk to any sales rep you have, this would be a big deal. They are in the trenches with you and helping you fight along the line so that you get better faster. And that, my friends, are the federal, state, and local levels of sales enablement for your enablement constitutional republic. Thank you. I can't really take total credit for it because I got the idea from someone who actually used it in a totally different context, but I went ahead and stole it and worked it up. So we have a time for a couple of questions, just maybe one or two if someone has any. I know you're tired and the cookies are wearing off. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I certainly will. There we go.
So I'm curious, one questions. One is, how much time are you spending on just-in-time training as a percentage of everything else that you're identifying as falling in this bucket?
Okay, so the question is, how much time are you spending on just-in-time training at the federal level? And the right answer is, in our practice, it depends on how much stuff comes up that needs just-in-time information. So there is no quota. We can handle it if it comes up immediately, like a competitor gets bought. We're going to spend a lot of time on it comparative to other stuff. If it's just something about a feature that wasn't really working, but now it is, and everybody needs to know about it, a lunch and learn, or even an enablement brief that goes out in one of the 4 ways we communicate with the teams will suffice.
My follow-up question to that, do you have a different strategy for your just-in-time training for different sales roles or segments? So SME versus enterprise,
Right.
business, growth?
No.
No, it's kind of like
It is.
Yeah.
Because remember, at the federal level, the information that makes sense to come from us goes to all. Now, that doesn't mean that the way we're going to put the stuff out for mid-market versus enterprise versus SMB is exactly the same. But we will put something out for everybody, depending on the content that needs just-in-time training. Great questions. Anyone else? Yes. Oh, that was an itch. Got it. Yeah.
How do you communicate to managers and sellers their responsibility? And not everyone sees your presentation, they don't understand.
Right.
They may be supporting, but they figure out.
That's a great question. The question was, how do you communicate and possibly get buy-in on this whole concept of 3 levels of enablement from the managers who may not necessarily understand it or have been told it in the beginning? And the last thing I was going to tell you was going to underscore that. It is, for me, a process of just osmosis that happened. I started coming up with this in staff meetings and management meetings and sort of said, so from the federal level, if you were, sort of the enablement team, we would do this, this, and this, but then it would be incumbent upon the managers, AKA at the state level, to be able to bring in this and do this kind of training because it's very specific for their organizations to do it the right way. And I swear to you, Alicia is sitting right here. She's an employee in sales enablement. It took off like wildfire. And I started going into meetings where they were talking federal, state, and local without me even bringing it up. And it just is easier for them to be able to have that way to classify the kinds of enablement, and not one single manager doesn't understand what that is now. And if they didn't, a 5-minute conversation with them validating they have a big role in enablement, which is what they really want to hear, will do so. It also helps to have a massive senior management endorsement and bias that will basically tell their boss's boss's boss, yes, buy into this. There's just no way you can get around that. Anybody else? Well, listen, there's a final slide which they jumped off of, and I'm going to go to it real quick. And this has my information and what I do. Whoops, there I am. The cell phone is the most important because, as I mentioned, I've been here for God knows how long, and as of November 1st, I'm retiring. So this will be one of my very last presentations live. However, I plan to stay in the game. I plan to do a little bit of contracting. Part of it will be with my 7-iron. But I encourage all of you, if you want to talk more about this concept or anything at all, the cell phone is the best way to get a hold of me. And I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for being such an attentive audience.